you're going to match each of these points. You're first going to match the black seams here. And so just match those together and then along the sides here. And we'll just put a pin there. Now to match these points, you're going to go, if you see the stitching goes this way and then this way. So where the stitching intersects, makes that little V, you're going to put your pin in there, in the top one. Then pick that up and look for the same area on the bottom one. This is going to be hard to see because here is the seam where it's pressed on this triangle. And then I'm going to put the pin right at the very tip of the triangle. And then what you want to do is put them together, and you want to look at the pin and make sure it's perpendicular. That means coming straight out of the fabric. If the pin is like this and it's going angled like that, it's not right. Your points won't meet. So you want to be perfectly straight like this. Then you turn it and put the pin in. Do the same thing all the way down. So you're going to match this top point of the triangle, and you can see there where it's matched, where the three pieces come together, and then find the same place right here and match them together. And now let me find a place that has different color fabrics. Here's a good one right here. So here you see the point where the two meet right there, and you can see that the distance between this point and the edge of the fabric is not 1/4 of an inch. It's less than that. But as long as we match these points up, it'll be fine if we pay attention. So here you have some different fabrics, and here again is where the point meets, and you see that this distance here is not really 1/4 of an inch. And so just make sure that your pin is perpendicular and put it in. And you're going to do that down the whole side. Now to sew this together, you're going to start here, use your 1/4 inch foot. And I don't like to stitch over pins, but if you stitch over pins, you can go ahead. But I just I take this pin out first, and I put this in the machine and start at 1/4 of an inch. And then what I do is I'm aiming for this next pin, and where this pin goes into the fabric, that's what I'm aiming for. And if it's 1/4 of an inch, that's great. If it's less than or a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, I don't worry about it. So when I get to this point, I take the pin out and then stitch right where that pin went into the fabric. And then once you pass this part, you aim for the next one. So where the next pin goes into the fabric. So you're stitching from pin to pin each time. And most of the time it's going to be pretty good, but sometimes you'll have a small, like this one here that we ran into, where this is not 1/4 of an inch, but if I just concentrate on going from pin to pin, of course this one's not pinned, but from this part down to this part, then we'll get a straight line there, and it should be okay. Once you've laid out all of your blocks, you're going to start sewing the rows together. And between each block, you're going to sew a sashing strip. Now these are only going between the blocks. There's nothing going on the outer edges. After all the rows have been sewn together, you're going to sew a horizontal sashing strip between each row. So now I'm going to show you how I sew the sashing strip onto the row. This is the horizontal sashing strip. And this is the same method I use for borders. So borders and sashings are going to be the same way. Take one of your rows or several of your rows and measure the entire width that you're going to add your sashing to. Then take your sashing strip and cut it to the same width. Next, you're going to find the very center of your row. Just fold it in half and place a pin right at the halfway mark. Open this up and do the same thing with the sashing strip. Find the center. And place a pin at the center. Even if you have an even amount of blocks and you say you have 6 blocks across, block to block, and you just go to the 3rd block and place the pin there, that sometimes may not be the very center, so that's why I fold it each time. Now when I sew a piece of fabric like this that's not pieced onto a pieced row or just the pieced quilt top, I put the seams, the pieced side, toward the feed dogs. So I have these down, and put your border on top. So we're going to match the 2 pins and pin. Then we're going to go to the other side and match up one side and put a pin there. And then depending on how long your piece is, you're going to start doing halves. So just lay it flat, even up the edge, and put a pin in. And then go halfway between here and the other pin and put a pin in. And you can do this as many times as you need for your pins. And once you do this, go to the other side and do the same thing. Even up the edges, go to the center and pin. Now the reason I put the pieced side down to the feed dogs is these sashing strips were cut on the lengthwise grain. That means there is no give to them. They don't stretch at all. They stretch a little bit in the other direction, but they don't stretch at all. So if you ever have to ease in anything, say something slightly different, and you put this at the bottom, the feed dogs are just going to be taking that and pushing it along. So if you put the feed dogs next to these seams, it will take the seams in and sort of ease in as you stitch. And when you stitch this on, you're going to start at the first end, take a few stitches and stop with your needle down and take the pin out. And then just stitch from this area, this pin to this pin. When you get here, take the pin out. And if there's any easing that needs to be done, you just do it between the pins and go all the way down to get to the end. Now when you have a row that has a sashing strip sewn on and you're going to sew it to the next row, so the sashing will be between the 2 rows. You also have these vertical sashings, and you need to line them up from this row to this row. So if you just sort of willy-nilly or just match the ends in the center, you might be off slightly. If we take a piece of paper and we lay it along the edge of this sashing strip, you see where it ends down here. So we want these to end up like this. We want to be sure they line up perfectly all the way down the row. And this is how I do that. Instead of finding the center and going from the center out, we're going to start at the end, and then we're going to go to each sashing strip and address each one separately. So I start by the sashing strip that's already sewn on. I lay a straight edge. In this case, I'm just using a piece of paper. You can use a ruler or whatever you want. And right along the edge of this paper, I'm going to place a pin. So the pin is even with the edge of the paper. And do the same thing on this side. Line it up, the edge of the sashing, and place a pin right there. And do that all the way down. Once you've marked all of your vertical sashings with your pins, we're going to take the row that we're going to sew it on and flip it over. And since we want the seam lines to be against the feed dogs, we're going to turn this entire thing over. So now we have our pins at the top. And we're going to start by just matching the pins with the seam lines from the bottom. So here are the pins, and you flip it over like this, and you can see they'll match just like that. So flip those and pin. And do that all the way down, and then also put a pin at the very end and stitch the two together. Now after you've sewn all the rows together and that part of the quilt top is finished, you're going to do your borders, and these are the pieces you cut on the lengthwise grain. You're going to do this borders the same way you did the sashing. You're going to measure the sides of the borders first, cut 2 pieces to that size, and stitch them on the sides of the quilt top. Then do the same thing for the top and bottom, and use these 2 pieces for the top and bottom.